Hey, it's Jeremy Boulton here. Today, I'm going to talk to you in this podcast about the repertoire in my recital, Songs of Travel, at the Church on the Mall in Wollongong on the 13th of July at 3 p.m. And the reason why I wanted to do this is to give you a bit of an insight if you think of coming along, and but if not, if you're not coming and you're just having a listen, well, that's fine too. It's just interesting to maybe hear about some of this repertoire if you're familiar with it. And particularly the repertoire I want to have a chat about is the Songs of Travel by Vaughan-Williams, which I'll be opening the program with on the 13th of July. Now, I came across this excellent essay out of this book called Vaughan-Williams Essays, funnily enough, by Byron Adams and Robin Wells. And in chapter 7 of this book, there's a wonderful essay by Rufus Hallmark, and talking about everything to do with the Songs of Travel, and with a focus on the text and Vaughan-Williams and how everything came to be a thing as a cycle. Now, you might wonder, well, why would you start writing this thing? And why did it take sort of 40 years to be a sort of thing as a whole and be established and published by Boosey as a whole with the whole cycle? Now, it all started in 1894, on the 17th of December. The London press announced the death 2 weeks earlier in Samoa of Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, to give you an idea about how sort of important that was, well, the Times, they ran a 2.5 column obituary on page 6, so not hitting front page, but page 6, still a quite significant part of a normal newspaper. But there was another publication, the Pall Mall Gazette, which was more sort of literarily and artistically inclined, and that opened with a front page notice, and there was a special biography and literary appreciation inside, and a big sort of spread on page 7. So a big announcement on the front and page 7. Now, this is quite interesting. I mean, he was an author, a poet. Obviously, more famously wrote Treasure Island, which is now a sort of a classic and very popular, particularly with children and things. But obviously quite an influential writer at the time. Now, why did this cycle start getting written by Vaughan-Williams? Well, there was a magazine. Basically, the story goes, there was a magazine that wanted to pay some sort of tribute, and Vaughan-Williams got commissioned quite young to basically set some text, and the text that was sort of suggested to him was "Whither Must I Wander," and that appears in the standard performance of this cycle. That appears in 7th place, so it's the 7th piece you hear. But it was written first, and it would be some time until the second lot of these songs would come out. And so the second publication would come out in a set of 3, and then after that, another set of 3, until finally, in the Boosey and Hawkes edition, when it was published, it came together as a set of 9 songs, which is quite fascinating. Now, I want to have a quick chat about the order of everything. There's different orders when it comes to how Louis Stevenson published them and how Boosey and Hawkes published them for Vaughan-Williams. And if we look at Robert Louis Stevenson and Vaughan-Williams, we can see the main similarity is The Vagabond, which is the opening piece. Give to me the life I love. That piece opens the program. And finally, we have I have trod the upward and the downward slope, closing the cycle and closing both publications, both in just text in Stevenson's case and in Vaughan-Williams' case, closing the Boosey and Hawkes edition. Now, in between that, if you look right into it, there's a huge variance in deciding in their choosings about what order they were both in. And this is something that quite, it sort of piqued my interest. And so I've decided, instead of going Vagabond, then Let Beauty Awake, The Roadside Fire, Youth and Love, In Dreams, The Infinite Shining Heavens, then Whither Must I Wander, Bright is the Ring of Words, finishing with I Have Trod the Upward and the Downward Slope, rather than doing that standard order in the Boozy and Hawkes edition, I've decided to change that up a bit, and there's a reasoning behind it. Now, it is common sense to do the Vagabond, the opening piece, in the standard performance first. And there's reason for that. It's setting up the scene of the Vagabond and what he's prepared to do and what he's prepared to try, and setting up his character, his persona, and giving the audience, and I guess the reader in Stevenson's case, an idea of who this man is. And in Stevenson's case, all of these poems were written on his travels throughout the world. They were written over a long period of time, and they were always written while he was travelling. And so he would later call these poems / sort of songs of travel. So after he's set out on this journey, you can hear a solid march in the piano, in the Vaughan-Williams setting. After that, I've chosen to do Whither Must I Wander, which is the first piece that was written out of all of these, and at a point in Vaughan-Williams' output that was quite early. So there's a choice I've made there, and following that, there's going to be Roadside Fire. And Roadside Fire is basically a little idyllic sort of play on sort of, a very simplistic, youthful relationship. And by youthful, I mean quite young. I mean the idea perhaps a 7 or 8 year old would have of a happy marriage, and I'll make you brooches and toys for your delight is one of the quotes from that text. And so it's quite an early sort of idea of love and setting out on the journey. And Whither Must I Wander, which is coming before that, has sort of also further set up the Vagabond and this idea of a maturity and a maturing of this person. But then we go right back with the Roadside Fire, and then after that, after we've had this childlike fantasy of the love, after that we have Let Beauty Awake in my performance. And Let Beauty Awake opens with a piano chord which goes up and down. It's arpeggiated, and it resembles a harp, and sort of a harp that is tranquil and peaceful, and at the same time in a minor key, creating a bit of a curiosity there. Now, that Let Beauty Awake is an awakening of perhaps a new day, and so maybe that child has had some time in the Roadside Fire to fantasize about the love, and I think now we've moved on. Let Beauty Awake, it reminds you of spring, it reminds you of things like perhaps fertility, that sort of thing. Let Beauty Awake, it's the morning, it's the springtime in the music. You can hear that in Vaughan-Williams' setting. Now, after that, I made a choice to do The Infinite Shining Heavens next. And the one reason why I think it's quite interesting is when you perform these two pieces together, they are related somewhat in key. Being, this may, I don't know how musical you are, but basically the F sharp minor key, which is in The Infinite Shining Heavens, relates to the A minor, roughly, sort of key in The Infinite Shining Heavens. And we actually have a chord at the end of Let Beauty Awake, which is another harp sort of reference and a curious sort of thing. And out of that can blossom this descending passage, which is very much related to each other in the keys. And this is not how they're performed in order. These two pieces, Let Beauty Awake, occurs second in the edition of Boozy and Hawkes, and number 6 is Infinite Shining Heavens. So there's 3 pieces between them. So performing these together gives it a bit of an awakening in Let Beauty Awake, and then we've moved through the day, and we've fallen into somewhat of a slumber and a reflective moment in the infinite shining heavens, and reflecting in this piece about the stars and the day that has been, and what he's experiencing at that moment, as well, and in reflecting at the stars and trying to understand what's going on with them, and reflecting on how that's making him feel. Now, I then decide to take a change into Youth and Love, which, it's in terms of key. If you're still interested with the keys, it's I think we move to a sort of a G major, and it's an unstable G major. It has a D on the bottom, which just basically means the voicing of the chord means it's unstable. It's not quite comfortable, but the sonority and the tonality is quite bright, and it's light. It's not intense. It's gorgeous even, and there's beautiful dissonances and sort of clashing notes that resolve all the time. And we've returned back to the sort of idea of Roadside Fire, of youth and love. The problem. Not the problem. The difference is with youth in this respect, and love, and the voice of this person is that now he's more experienced, and he's saying to the heart of youth, there's all these things about love that we need to understand, and perhaps I'll read you a bit of it. Let's have a look here. Youth and love. To the heart of youth, the world. I'm just having a look through. It's very late at the moment, so I'm just sort of just having a flick through everything. It's just having a little flick through here. Here we go. To the heart of youth, the world is a highway side, passing forever he fares, and on either hand, deep in the garden's golden pavilions hide, nestle in orchard bloom, and far on the level land, call him with lighted lamp in the eventide. And then we have something that's more sort of profound. Cries but a wayside word to her at the garden gates. Now he's leaving. And then we have the reflection, which links up to the roadside fire, the sort of very young love at the boy and girl sort of level. And he says in this piece here, sings but a boyish stave. So it's a reflection of what we've had, and that's why I believe we should have it in this part of the cycle. And his face is gone is the final line, and his face is gone, and we have that loss of love there. And that's, for me, they're mature themes, and they're reflections on the simplicity of young love in terms of the very young. After that, we have In Dreams, and In Dreams is the most dissonant and the most discordant piece out of all of them. And In Dreams, it gets quite dramatic and reflective, but essentially it's In Dreams, unhappy, I behold you stand as heretofore, the unremembered tokens of your hand avail no more. I'm just trying to find the page. No more the morning glow, no more the grace enshrines endears. So it's quite reflective and negative, and we have sort of this idea of tears coming into things. It's a final break and a final reflection on everything that's gone on in this vagabond's life, in this travelling man's life. Finally, we have Bright is the Ring of Words. And yes, it's a reflection on singing and the singer and the travelling singer, perhaps in a countryside. And if we think about Vaughan-Williams and what he would have been thinking about, and particularly with later composers like Percy Grainger, who would go about the English countryside and collect on his recording clays, he would collect all of the folk tunes. It's a very strong tradition in that sense that has now been lost, unfortunately, and luckily we have those resources. But Bright is the Ring of Words is the impact of a singer, I guess. Well, this is what it is for me anyway. But it's the impact that music can have on an audience, I guess, on a people down the generations, and that the singing and the music and the text lives on after the singer is dead. So you don't even have to write the stuff; you can just pass it on, and that can be your gift to the world. So it's sort of an unrelated piece, somewhat. And I think it belongs at the end of this program as a reflective piece, and it also, in the terms of the key relationships, the Vagabond, the first piece, is in C minor, whereas Bright is the Ring of Words is in C major. So we've had a lift now, and we've had this maturity after the negativity and the struggles of the young vagabond. Now we have a more reflective one that can enjoy the moment and accept that whilst fate may be a thing that he has to deal with, and perhaps in the case of maybe he's lost someone or he's dying himself, or he will die one day, we have this reflection and a lift after all of this. Now, the final piece, I have trod the upward and the downward slope. It starts, or it finishes in D major, and it starts in D minor. Now, the interesting thing about this piece, and why it's last, of course, it's a reflection and it's a final death, and it ends with the line, and closed the door, and that's a final acceptance of the end, and the music carries on in a reflective tone now at a much slower tempo, and it's the same music as the opening music. As the Bright is the Ring of Words. So we have that continuation on there. And we also hear elements of the Vagabond, the opening piece, as well. So there's a lot there. It's sort of, I've put reason behind why I've wanted to do these, and I had to have a good think about it. I had to do some reading and what the original intentions were, but these are decisions I've sort of come to, and I think why stick to the way they're published in a Boozy and Hawkes edition? Why not do the research and have a go? Plunkett Green, who was a popular baritone in England, he sort of popularised these songs, but the difference was that he never performed them as a full cycle. So whilst he had performed them all in recitals, and we have the research to prove that, he didn't perform them as a whole cycle. So we don't understand his interpretation, even though he was probably, according to reviews and such, he was the authority on these songs, if you like. Plunkett Green, who of course wrote the book, I think it's The Interpretation of Song. It's his book there. It's just over on my shelf. I'm just having a look, making sure that was the right title. So yeah, much to think about with the songs of travel, but really we need to enjoy them, I believe, as a cycle, and do them together. And we need to see a journey going on with the singer, no matter who it is, and that's what I'll be trying to do at this recital. Now, after this cycle, I'm going to be joined by Nicolas Serray. I'm going to go have a break, probably, and he's going to play some barrios, which is a gorgeous little piece he's got going. It's quite challenging as well, and it's definitely shows off some elements of virtuosity, so I would highly recommend Nicolas is playing. It's wonderful. Now, after that, I've decided to do something quite different, and I'm looking at the music of Polish composer Lutosławski, and I had a look at his song repertoire, and there's not very much of it, and there's so little of it that I've decided to do three pieces from it called, and the work is called 5 Songs for Female Voice and Piano. Now, originally I thought, well, it's going to be a soprano voice, and it turns out it's not. It's quite more of a mezzo voice, so I'm going to sing them in the original keys. And why he says female voice, and why he chose female voice, I would say because of the timbres and how it works with the piano. But I still think with the exactness and the preciseness of his markings in the music, He has a very strict idea of what each measure should sound like and do, and he has additive rhythms and that sort of thing. He has mixed meters, they change all the time. He's creating, it sort of resembles Impressionism in a way. So, for example, the first piece is the C, and it's very much a wavy sort of minimalist composition that sort of flourishes out, but essentially it's a depiction of the sea, and then we have winter as well. So we have these different elements, and they're sort of vast, broad elements. And so I think he chose female voice for the timbres, but I don't think it's impossible to portray what he wants in the music, and that's why I've chosen to do them. I think they're quite gorgeous songs, and I must admit, I did omit the two most dissonant pieces and the most challenging sort of pieces, but I wanted to show what Lutosławski could really achieve for a listener, and like the Songs of Travel, somewhat wash over you and somewhat give you an idea of what's going on. In the sense of Vaughan-Williams, the journey of the whole thing, but in Lutosławski depicting a scene, which I believe Vaughan-Williams also does in the accompaniment. Now, after this, we're going to have some fun. After the Lutosławski, I'm going to be performing the Don Quixote songs, the settings by Ravel. Now, I'm actually just opening my interpretation of French song by Pierre Bernard, which is a wonderful book, which sort of gives you a deep dive into this repertoire. But basically, while I get to my page, basically these songs were written for a film version of Don Quixote. And Ravel didn't know this, but he was one of 5 or 6 composers that were commissioned to do this work. And the idea was that the director would afterwards, after getting all the submissions, would choose one. And whilst they probably all got paid, because they didn't know, the composers didn't know that there were more composers being engaged, so they would have got their fee. But the difference was that he would make a decision after which ones stayed in the film. Now, it's important to note that this film was not an operatic film. It wasn't meant to be a filmed opera. It was a very early film. Now, these 3 pieces were meant to appear in different sections of the film, and that's the one thing to note. Now, Ravel did not actually get selected for this. He got rejected, and he wasn't so happy about that. Yet, at the same time, with help, because this was his last composition entirely, so there's something else to note there. Ravel was quite ill, and so he had a hand in orchestrating it in terms of writing it on the page. It's all his orchestration when there's an orchestrated version of it, and the piano is all him in his writing. Now, it's very important to note Don Quixote. Well, who is he? He's basically a guy who's trying to bring back chivalry in society, and so he recruits Panza, who's a sort of a friend, and he has an old sort of horse on his last legs, and he tropes around, and he basically sort of fawns and all over, and sort of takes it as his main goal to really love this woman, Dulcinea, and that's what he's decided to do, and he's gone totally mad at the same time. This is not something that's come out of sanity. He is totally insane, and I think it's important we remember that. But the reason why these songs are special is because he is a character, and the fact that he is insane means you have license to do the character and do it as a whole, not treat these as art songs. These were meant to be performed on camera for a film that was meant to be a continuation of the character. They weren't separate. They were to be sung by the character, or if the actor was not going to sing, they would be voiced over, or they sung over the actor acting it out. So, important things to know. Basically, each piece, starting with the romantic song, the prayer, the second song, and the drinking song at the end, each one has a Spanish rhythm, and it's somewhat an element of exoticism penetrating into early film music, which is quite interesting as well. And if we think about that, well, we look at the Hans Zimmer types, even in the modern day, and if you look at Gladiator and the random singing that was put in, that was meant to resemble sort of the period singing. Whereas actually, if you look into it, the words were actually gibberish. They don't mean anything anyway. It's just this Australian woman from Melbourne who he loved the sound of her voice and stuck her in the studio and got her to sing this melody to gibberish. So, it is an element of exoticism in terms of Ravel grabbing these typical sort of iconic Spanish rhythms and feels and putting it into this music. It's a very clear choice what he's done, and that's why there's a lack of freedom which some people take in composers of the same period like Debussy. This is very specific music. It is at the time of the Impressionist period, but it is not really Impressionist music. That's the difference. It has a very much more of an expressive element to it, even though it is comic and not like sort of the German expressionism of Salome and those sort of ideas, Pierrot Lunaire, those sort of very heavily expressionist movements within music. Now, after that, I'm going to do a couple of arias. Hai già vinta la causa from Le nozze di Figaro by Mozart. So in this aria, basically the count has realised or he's overheard that Figaro's already won the case, if you like, and you got to look into the story of that. But basically, he's been totally deceived by Susanna, who is actually a lot smarter than him. And he feels betrayed because, he's the count and he's meant to have all the power and the control, and he's totally lost it. And now he's going to attempt to enact revenge on them, and this is part of the plot, and he rejoices in that. After that, I'm going to wrap up with an aria from Bellini, Vincenzo Bellini's opera I Puritani, the Puritans, in English. So this recital aria, this scene, this moment, is Riccardo, and Riccardo is experiencing, he's the leading lady, basically. He's not going to have her. She doesn't like him. She likes the other guy, who is the tenor. So pretty simple sort of baritone situation. But unlike a lot of evil sort of baritones or basses who want to grab these women and enact revenge and bed them like the Count does in Figaro, the difference is he's basically going to struggle with this for his entire life, and he's never going to have this, and there's no hope left for him in being happy, and there's no way to basically rejoice and get over that. And that's something quite interesting with Bellini, and choosing to go about it that way, the librettists as well. So a different setting there for a baritone. So basically that wraps up my program. The main reason, though, I wanted to choose the Songs of Travel and some of the arias, particularly like the final Bellini aria, is they're me at the moment. And that's something that, there's challenges in life, and I've sort of embraced them and, working through them. And the Songs of Travel, for me, basically are me moving through the world and finding my feet, and whether that be in relationships, friendships, whether it be my career. It's something that, I do struggle with, but we're going to go about expressing it and go about it that way and start pushing further into the emotions and going there and letting yourself go there, because I've never done it before. And it's really helped me doing this repertoire, and I'm basically able to do so much better with the experience. And perhaps that's somewhat, as Alan E. Hicks talks about in Singer and Actor, affective memory, as he calls it, using an experience to, generate something on stage. Perhaps that's it, but whatever it is, I'm just going to keep doing it, keep exploring the emotions and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to wrap up now, just shy of 30 minutes on this podcast, but it's been so lovely to chat, and I'll see you at the recital. Bye-bye.